Brendan Carter, mate.
Tom Hollings, how are you?
So well. It's an early start, early for a glass of Fiano. Mate, the one half of Unico Zelo.
The lesser half.
Definitely the lesser half.
Absolutely.
I don't think there's any debate about that. Mate, so good to have you here as always. Always great to pick your brain. I was fortunate enough 2 days ago, I think it was 2 days ago, I lose track of my weeks.
Yes,
the
it was 2 days ago, yeah.
The Fiano Symposium. Yeah. The Symposium.
The Symposium.
How cool, by the way, to be able to just do a symposium.
Look,
We need to do some symposiums.
There's a lot of hyperbole going on in that whole sort of thing. I didn't exactly sign up for the symposium name, but yeah, like a focus on Fiano in the global context, helping people understand what Fiano looks like from the context of Avellino, but also like how great the other Australian producers are going with it. And also kind of like a touching point on where we're at. You know, it's not a competition in that sort of sense, right? That's why we're obviously running masterclasses on Fiano at the moment, talking about other people's Fiano, because there's a lot of other winemakers that we actually respect and what they do with the variety.
You've been championing Fiano and other varieties like Nero, Dolcetto, etc. for a long time. Why? Why?
Oh,
give us the why.
We don't have long enough, Tom.
Wind you up.
We don't have long enough. Why Fiano? Well, firstly, we've not been championing it the longest. You know, that would go to probably like Karina Wright or Mark Lloyd. You know, certainly McLaren Vale is a bit of like a strong hub for Fiano. But
drinking, by the way, sorry, the Jaden Jasper
Fiano.
23?
Should be 23, I think, or maybe even
23.
The Fiano is such cheers. Such a brilliant and beautiful solution to a number of problems that we have in the Australian wine industry. And that's why we sort of focus on things like, well, the Riverland is a big part. You know, a lot of the issues that we have with the Riverland is actually stems from the fact that a lot of Riverland growers are heavily reliant on irrigation, on water use. So inevitably what happens is we go through a bunch of drought-stricken years, and we also know that the average price for Riverland fruit is quite low. So inevitably what happens is you have a drought-stricken year, they put on large amounts of irrigation, which costs them an arm and a leg. During droughts, the cost for water goes up. And this can potentially, and has led a lot of growers to become debt funded. So every single year, they need to ask the bank for money to grow the next year's crop. Now, if you're just unfortunate, like it's pure luck at that point, that if you have a couple more drought years, which I think is like, 4 or 6 out of every 10 at the moment, it means that you are heavily, heavily exposed to basically having your entire farm like gone, taken away from you. So the idea was to, how can we incentivize people and farmers to plant things in the ground that actually wean them off the drug that is irrigation. Now, we also know from the global context of wine, irrigation is not really accepted in the highest standards of wine, like AOC, DOCG level wines for the most part are illegal to irrigate. So
Australia's probably not going to get to that point.
I think it can get to I don't think it'll get to the point where we'll legislate against it. I think it would actually be a smart idea if we did at this point. You know, we've actually got some water, so hold on to it. Don't use it to, plant something that you can just pump up to export, because of course, a lot of the value in the wine industry is driven by scarcity. Why do we actively encourage people to do anti-scarcity, which is to make more yield than is natural? Plus we know it makes lesser quality wine. It just seems really backwards. So Fiano is a really beautiful solution to that particular problem because it weans people off that drug naturally. It also makes really, really great quality wine that goes with Australian food. And it answers the big sort of question is, we will often sit back and scratch our heads and be like, how did Shiraz happen? Like, I don't love Shiraz, love our great producers and all that, but I think it is a little bit like elephant in the room. No one really drinks big, rich, heavy extracted anything under the age of like 40. And that kind of makes sense when you consider what happened with just like our food culture's shifted. Our populace has changed astronomically since the dropping of the White Australia policy. So our like proteins have gone from beef and lamb to poultry and fish. Our carbohydrates have gone from pastries and potatoes to rice and vegetables. And this has really happened in a short expanse of time. So our wines naturally need to alter and shift and change in both their variety and style to be able to match that food. Fiano is another beautiful solution for that. We're looking for something that goes with spice, with high-toned aromatics.
So what is it about the variety and how it tastes and the textures, I guess, that you think makes it pair well with those foods?
It has complexity, weight, and richness that is not born from oak. That is 100% fruit derived. And Australians typically, and we do really obsess over making wine for Aussies, because I think you start to have these sort of weird quasi things like Barossa Shiraz became this sort of heavy Australian thing. So we weren't making wine for Australians and Australian palates. We started making them for international palates. I think when you're selling wine anywhere, you need to be selling the taste of your place, which is inherently Australia. That's the best we can do. I can't sell Barolo from Australia. It doesn't exist. So making a wine that's reflective of what Australian consumer preferences actually, search for, which is a lot of primary characters. Oak is a secondary character. Maturation is a tertiary character. We typically, as a populace, don't gravitate towards these en masse. Whereas Fiano, you can get your secondary characters, you can get your richness, your texture, your weight, without actually having to rely on any kind of secondary
it has that kind
input.
of waxiness, doesn't it? And that kind of, it almost feels like a creaminess in the wines that isn't oak derived. And that's why I think I agree with you. Why I think the variety is doing so well and can do so much better is it's somewhat recognisable to Aussie palates in compared to some other varieties from Europe, which might be even like a Gruner, which can be like leaner and more austere and minerally. That is a harder sell in a lot of respects to a lot of Australian palates. Vermentino, I would say similar, right? The best Vermentinos that I tasted are salty and lean, and I love them, right? But to Aussies, we like flavour, a bit of richness. That's what we're used to. And Fiano gives you that in spades, but also retains acid and balance.
There's so many different
Riesling.
meta concepts behind why varieties go well and why they don't. Gruner Veltliner was really driven in the industry by the on-trade. Soms in the late 90s, early noughties. Again, you need to consider wine as a holistic thing. Gruner Veltliner needs to have broad scale adoption and across the Australian public. Firstly, it's hard to pronounce, and we simply just don't have a lot to do with Austria. Not as much as we have Italian heritage, for example. Vermentino.
Mate, you're looking at Austrian heritage right here, so be careful.
No. I suppose we're talking big numbers.
I drank Gruner for breakfast.
And how many people walk through your door and buy Gruner every day? We're still talking about we've got to make Gruner happen. It's not happening. Fiano's easy to pronounce, it's easy to understand, it's easy to conceptualize. It ticks the Riesling box if you want it to. It ticks the Pinot Gris box if you want it to. It ticks the unwooded Chardonnay box if you want it to. So you've now got a great variety that allows a simplification of a lot of wine and dining options for consumers. Bringing a lot of disparate people going, I'm not too sure if I'm a wooded or unwooded Chardonnay person or a Pinot Gris person or it's all too hard now. Suddenly that educational barrier gets lifted because we've now got decision fatigue setting in. What if you could just present one wine that kind of ticks most of those boxes?
That's kind of like the Aussie white, and it could be it. You mentioned in the symposium the other day about, we were talking, you very generously brought a lineup of excellent Campagna, Avellino producers to the tasting, which is great to taste them, and then 4 of your Fianos, and then 4 of the Great Australian Fianos. It's a really awesome concept. And we were talking about comparisons in style between the Italians and the Australians, and you pointed out, well, this is maybe a bit of a fallacy to kind of be looking at it through that lens of how does this compare to it? Because it's different. It's going to be different. And do we need to do that? Can this be the Australian version? And maybe, just maybe, Fiano here can usurp in some respects what comes to Campagna.
I think it can.
Not in some subjective qualitative sense, but in terms of global relevance.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. When it comes to the Campagna producers, a lot of people are just very sort of unaware of the history of Fiano and how it's only really been popular or sort of revived in Italy since the 50s. And we got Fiano into Australia in the 70s. So you're really looking at only a 30-year head start at most between how long Fiano has even just existed. It existed a very, very long period of time, but its revival post basically Pompeii.
Right, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's not like the Italians have
Do we need a Pompeii event to kick things along?
No, I hope not. But it's not like the Italians have this 400-500 year production history in recent times that would really solidify them as the only ones to have any kind of agency or legitimacy over the grape variety. It was more Roman and Pompeii at a Paestum, that's where it came from. So you do have this sort of weird enigma with that. We kind of Fiano di Avellino is this DOCG, but the reality is Australia's been producing it as a commercial product for almost the same amount of time. I think it's important to reference the more climatic data as what we call it's to get super nerdy. You've got your Winkler index and your homocline models. If you use those models to determine what grape to plant.
We follow them closely.
Yeah. from there, I think basically the inspiration from overseas should just stop. You should look internally. Because then you've got to think about, eventually it's going to get to a point where you're going to grab this bottle of wine and we're going to go to somewhere in Australia, for example, and say, you should drink this bottle of wine. They go, why? And then we need to give them the justified reasons why they should drink this bottle of wine instead of another bottle of wine. And a lot of it should really come down to, well, you're Aussie. This is your food that you eat, right? This will probably go with the food that you eat and the lifestyle that you have. You take this bottle of, in context into like USA, for example, and they go, why should I buy this bottle of wine? They go, well, it's Australian. They go, why should I buy an Australian wine? Have an Australian experience. If that is not real, if that Australian experience, Barossa Shiraz, like how many people, 98% of our populace lives within 20 minutes of a beach. We're very large amounts of poultry and seafood consumers. Like that's no longer an Australian experience. It's a fugazi. It's not real. So bringing the sense of authenticity to like global context to wine, I think is very important. So no matter what you do, eventually you're going to have to, if you're an Australian producer, justify the Australianness of your product. And I think that really needs to not take any form of inspiration from Italy apart from the climatic suitability, because let's face it, there's no native Australian grape variety.
Get started with that and then start with our own adventure. And same with the winemaking. I mean, you can, in fact, while we're doing that, we'll pour the Esso. But, looking to Italy and other parts of the world for winemaking inspiration, like this, is a great exercise. But then there's no reason we can't find our own paths there as well.
Totally.
Just to pause. This is fucking delicious, man. The 23 is so good. Have you tasted that recently?
No, not in a while.
Yeah. But if you ask every winemaker, they'll be like, yeah, but you haven't tried the 24. But no, the 23 is looking really good. Granny Smith apple.
That's one of the. Yeah, it's just leaner, isn't it? The 23 zippier, but it's got that talky kind of grippy thing, which is.
It's the only Fiano we actually do that's like reductively handled, which again is super nerdy shit, but it's lean, clean, green fighting machine. That's what it's meant to be. Yeah. It's meant to be the familiar wine that if you drink Pinot Gris, you're probably going to like this. It's pretty simple stuff.
Esoterico.
Not simple stuff.
So this has been a staple of these two certainly have been staples from the beginning, but the Esoterico has been in a lot of respects probably the wine that you're best known for now, I imagine, and I'd call it it'd be Australia's most popular orange wine.
I think we looked at the data. I mean, it's not necessarily a bragging point because orange wine's not exactly like it's trending. I guess it's actually starting to trend downwards at the moment. But for whatever reason, I can surmise a couple. I don't know of anyone producing more and selling more. I'd love to know. There are other orange wines that I also personally consume quite a lot of that are in similar styles, like Small Fries stuff is freaking awesome.
Tangerine Dream.
Tangerine Dream's awesome. A lot of stuff that Delinquente do, I'm a big fan of. I think we were certainly the first to take this particular grape variety as seriously. And
James Halliday's a big fan, I understand.
So I could get myself in hot water now. No,
James is a big watcher of the channel, so just.
So yes, when we sent off all of our like wine samples to be tried by James, I thought this was really weird. I actually had words with him about it, and they still didn't do anything. But I thought it was weird. I still got a chip on my shoulder about it, clearly. But like the actual, they rate all the wines, but then they give you this sort of paragraph summarizing your whole brand. Yeah. And at the end of that summary of the whole brand, I'm like, why do you even mention a wine in the brand summary?
Because he never ever does any other time.
The last thing is like, Esoterico is, in my view, a failure. And I was just like, I was heartbroken. I'd been reading like all through university. Like this was like, I'd put my heart and soul in this one. I sent it in to James Halliday. And I was like, are you sure? Like maybe you don't want to put that in the summary of the whole brand? And like, nope, James is like, sure he wants to put it in there. I was like, just really like, just da-da-da-da-da-da. And so I was like, okay, well, let's play a long game. Because to be honest, like at that point in time, the wine had already sold out. Yeah. And so I'm like, well.
So in some respects, it was a failure. You didn't have enough supply, right?
Yeah. So I decided.
I'm sure that's what he was referring to.
I decided not to send the wines in ever again. Not because I had a chip on my shoulder at all, but because.
So you threw your toys out of the cot.
You threw your toys out of the cot. No one can play with my Legos. It was quite remarkable because Esoterico started to grow and grow and grow. It's now like a third of our whole production. And it's such a great story because it's old vine Zabibo predominant that was, and currently is, at threat of being pulled out in the Riverland because of various issues within the wine industry that we're trying to tackle using unconventional means. And you need scale. So you need a wine at scale that is doing stuff like this to put Zabibo sort of back on the map, or what we call it in Australia, fruity Gordo. And it's, I think, a very important side. It's part of the reason why we love working with you, and we've got our YouTube channel. Your YouTube stuff's fantastic. We're very passionate about sort of putting wine in a much more sort of contemporary context in terms of media as well, because, and we never resubmit. If you resubmit, they rewrite it. And I didn't want them to change it, because it really is a remarkably, again, probably quasi-artistic take at relevance. Like this media outlet, that's really highly respected. Surely when you're criticizing wine or critiquing it or judging it, you need to remain relevant. How can something be a failure yet also be 1/3 of our whole business? And modesty aside, Unico is not exactly a failing business. And so Not yet. Not yet. Oh yeah, we've got plenty of time to fuck it up, Tom. Don't worry. But yeah, we never resubmitted. He really didn't like it, but like I think it was maybe for them before, like they couldn't understand the overall concept of what's happening to orange wine in Australia. I think we have agency over this style of wine. It goes with our food. As of the 23 census, 30% of our entire populace of Australian citizens did not start their lives in our country, and most of them, courtesy of what happened in the 70s, most of them have come from our neighbours. And so Australasia is very much a thing that's forefront of our mind. You know that your Epicurean landscape is changing when there is a banh mi price index in Melbourne, indexing the pricing of 350 banh mi restaurants around the CBD. Like, that's a part of the zeitgeist of Australian food culture. Again, the wines must be reflective of the food that we are consuming and eating in the modern day context. And this is, I would almost argue that Australia became a beer drinking nation, not because it's hot outside, because there's plenty of hot places that drink wine. Not because, or maybe just because the British came and took us over, but also because Asiatic, Indian and Arabic cuisines, which are now the predominant cuisines inside Australia, if you look at the data, never evolved with a wine industry to speak of. So maybe Australia's great meaningful contribution to the world of wine is to actually create wines for those foods, which are actually the most consumed foods in the world. Like, wouldn't that be awesome and we know that India is starting to get really interested in wine, but they don't have necessarily developed wine nation like we do. That's really quite complex and stratified. So what if we could deliver to the world wines that are so pinpoint, precise and perfect for those foods, because we have agency over them, because it's actually been a part of our culture for a while.
It's such an exciting concept and a hard one to get your head around, because we do tend to look at wine through this very French lens. And Australia's finest wines now, if you look at fine wines, are Chardonnays, are Cabernets, are Shiraz, are Pinots, are Rieslings, are Semillons. Are very Northern European varieties. And it's not like that's going to change overnight. We've got these incredible vineyards, we've got vine age, etc. But if you're looking at a long enough scale, and maybe that's the benefit for you and Laura of coming into this game so young, is you're going, hey, we want to be doing this in 50 or 60 years, not in 5 or 10 years. And I just want to make a nice Pinot like that guy over there. What are the varieties and the regions that are going to work for that? But then you've got to bridge that gap. You've got to go, okay, we've got the sustainability piece. We talked about that with the Fiano, why it works from a sustainability standpoint. You've got to bridge that gap to consumers. And how do you take that message to Australian drinkers? The world, yes, but first Australians. And I think what you guys have done amazingly well is with the overall package, the price point, the packaging, the way you communicate about wine. Like, just talk to us a little bit about that. Like, how deliberate are you guys working backwards from a customer to go, we want this finished product, Esoterico, to be $25 on the shelf, to look like this, to taste like that, to go with this, to be distributed this way?
It's 99.9% of every conversation we ever have. And I think every producer should be having that conversation. You've got different grades and classes of producer. You've got the ones that it's a retirement gig. You've got the ones that it's an inheritance gig. You've got the people that have like an artistic expression they just got to get out of their system. You've got the people that are just like, I love Burgundy, can't afford it, so I make Chardonnay anyway. And do, for the most part, pretty good jobs of it. Like, there's no, I enjoy all of those ones in all the Aussie contexts, for sure. But where we sit is, uniquely different in the sense that we are building something from scratch. We didn't inherit anything. And we were, and to a large degree, some of the only young people, we're all getting older, but we were at the time the only young people that were into wine as much as we were into wine. And I was like, well, wouldn't it be awesome if other people be into wine as well? And talking to our friends, they were all telling us all the reasons why they don't like wine. And I was like, but it doesn't need to be that way. It literally doesn't need to be that way. Like, a lot of the excuses were really shitty, really poor. I don't understand the nomenclature. I don't understand what grape varieties are. They just don't taste nice to me. And I'm like, well, yeah, of course, because maybe like my parents grew up eating beef and lamb. You know, we didn't grow up eating beef and lamb. It was a different world that my parents grew up in. So they have different wines. It's just unfortunate during 2008, 2009, 2010 when we were starting, you know, we didn't have a raft of wines and selections and choices that we have now that are much more contemporary and relevant, you know, these days. But every conversation, it's a reason why we don't put like the variety on the front of the label. We always, as an Australian sort of producing nation, we always brag about how we simplified wine by putting the variety on the front, a label. And I actually think it's a double-edged sword. Nothing could have been further damaging. You know, once you've got people addicted to the idea that I'm a Shiraz drinker, great. Then what happens is we go and buy, as an industry, the large swathes of land that are very cheap to farm, because don't worry about where it's grown, worry about what we grow it from. So we can plant Shiraz in the Riverland and irrigate it like 5, 10
While we're
hectare,
talking Shiraz, let's pull this, because I reckon that's going to be a good talking point, as much as I could sit on Esoterico all day.
If you ever look at, say, something like Esoterico, you know, if you all ask any wine producer in Australia what style of wine, don't worry about orange at this stage, but what style of wine they would avoid making and find hardest to sell, and they would typically say aromatic blends of whites.
Yeah.
Just mishmash blends. Our most popular wine that we make is a blend of Zabebo, Gewürztraminer, Fiano and Greco. You know, so a big part of that is that it's not written anywhere on the bottle, Zabebo, Gewürz, Fiano, Greco, and we say Esoterico on the front. And that's a really important thing because, okay, yeah, big bright labels in a bottle shop makes sense. What about on a wine list? You know, someone sees Zabebo on a wine list, nah, I'll take the Riesling, thanks.
Yeah.
Someone says Esoterico on a wine list.
What's that?
Well, what's that? Sure. But if they're after an esoteric wine, a weird wine, well, it's not like someone's going to go and buy, who's after Polish or Riesling, is going to buy this. And if they get it and they go, that's a little bit weird. And they go, well, you did literally, we have a wine called Fresh AF. Like, if you want Barossa Shiraz, you're probably not going to order it. So we actually niche down our customer. We select for our customers. We make sure that the right person that we want consuming the wines, rather than just sell a wine to everyone. Our wines aren't for everyone. I don't think any producer in the world makes wines for everyone. It just makes diluted, boring wine at that point, if you want to try to do that. We want to make interesting, unique wine, if that's why it's in the name, Unico. So you need to niche down your customers and be able to understand what life is like from their perspective.
And part of that is price point, obviously, as well, right?
Massive price point. Like we've tried being really ambitious, and I think there is price point and value. There's subtly different but very meaningful differences between those two things. You know, our price point has certainly remained as low as we can keep it, because at the end of the day, like we know that we sell wines to all age groups, but who we are really trying to speak to are people discovering wine for the first time. Now that could be happening at the age of 40, 50 or 60, whatever, 20. But this simplifies the entry point, and it makes it, this is the key point, it makes it fun. It doesn't make it an intellectual challenge. Wine is an intellectual challenge by its nature, but we don't need to make it that. We can make it so many other things than that. And if people want the intellectual sort of workhorse of the industry, then they can go and discover that. But I don't think you're going to get people to fall in love with you because you're the nerdiest. You know, people like having fun. People like putting a smile on their face, mate.
It's the funny thing with wine is, like, you don't want to totally dumb it down because the magic is in the detail. You can't, and we shouldn't, because otherwise it's just a fruit drink, and I don't know. Maybe,
it's all fermented grape juice at the end of the day.
But the magic in wine as well is these intricacies between vineyards and varieties, etc. But you've got to be able to package that up in a way that the average man understands and isn't intimidated by and gives a fuck about.
For me, it's important to get the wine on the table first and get it into people's glasses.
That's what you call the rip and tear range.
Rip, tear, share range.
Rip, tear, share. Yeah.
After that, people tend to discover that with wine, and the more that you get into it, the more that you realize, like with wine, amazing conversations can happen. We can talk about farming. We can talk about agriculture. We can talk about labor. We can talk about war. We can talk about cultural divides. We can talk about cultural mishmashes. There's so many conversations can happen that's wine adjacent. Talk about travel. And so wine is obviously at a commodified perspective. If we're breaking down big components, it's also a social lubricant, but it's one of the few products that we kind of have as a human race that's left, that's kind of like largely untouched, that we can have all of these different conversations around, and
it's a vehicle for it, isn't it?
Well, it gives us practice.
Yeah.
Like we probably have. This is where I go off onto a meta space. Like we'd probably have less conflict if we had more practice having difficult conversations, and all of those politics, labor, work, war.
You're saying wine can save the world, Brendan? Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying that I think we need to humanize whoever's sitting across the table from us, and I think wine's a really great key of doing that. A really easy way to do that.
Speaking of sitting across the table, we're on the same side of the table. So this is Nero d'Avola.
Yes.
This is the Mallee Gambit from the Clare. I was hoping to open the Pipe Dream Nero because I love that wine and I love the story behind this idea of Nero, the Pipe Dream that one day maybe Nero d'Avola could replace Shiraz as Australia's significant red variety. So you fell in love, correct me if I'm wrong, with Italian varieties early on, conversation with the likes of Steve Pannell, etc., and went to Italy with Laura.
Yep.
And discovered all these great Italian wines and drew inspiration from that. I want to talk a little bit about Nero. I also want to talk to you about what it's like running a business with your wife. That must be...
My wife runs the business with me, which is the more important. It's subtle but meaningful. She is the CEO. Like she is the boss. She's the majority owner. And yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, like spade to spade, I'm the big loud mouth that loves to get in front of a camera. I love to be creative. Laura loves to work really hard, absolutely nail it every single time, and I've watched her blossom as one of the most amazing and sort of under-celebrated, in my opinion, like great leaders of the industry. She really flies under the radar, which is kind of like a bit of a shame, but also equally, if you put her in this seat, she would be astronomically pissed off with me and very uncomfortable. I'm sure.
Well, we've done that with Laura before, and she does a great job. But
she's awesome. Yeah.
Less of the
she's the leader
overflowing kind of passion that you might get from yourself. But she's still. So she's kind of had more of the winemaking background, I guess. You both were making wine.
We both were making wine. Her red winemaking game is off the hook, though. Like she was with Henschke for a while, and then and they got extended to her enormous opportunities, and then went to Yves Couleron in the Rhone Valley.
Lovely wines.
And by that point in time, we were planning on having getting a few vintages under our belt elsewhere, but Unico had already kind of the Pandora's box had been open in a sense. So we were like, fuck, sorry, but we all just got to knuckle down here. I was at Jacobs Creek and then with Steve Pannell for a while, and he extended to me countless opportunities, way more than I probably deserved, to be fair. And through that world, met guys like Bart Van Olfen, who is the winemaker at Chalmers and owner of Chalmers with Kim and the family there. And again, more opportunities extended to us. Ended up at GD Vira, and then again by that point in time, Unico was just becoming such a behemoth that we ended up having to give ourselves jobs. We're just and then it's just been that's the story from there. Like we never really got the opportunity to go and do vintages elsewhere as much as we wanted to because it was just shit. Like we either make hay while the sun shines sort of deal.
And how about now? Because you got the little one there as well, and Shelby.
I was ignorant of every parent ever, and happy to admit that I'm wrong and that parents are the most unsung heroes and superstars. And I probably gave my parents a really hard time. Now that I am one, my old man always used to have this saying that, mate, before you realise I'm right, you're going to have kids of your own that think you're wrong. Well, Dad, it took less than that. Shelby doesn't think I'm wrong yet, but I tell you what, I know my dad was definitely right.
Does having kids do anything to alter the way you look at Unico Zelo?
Little bit. I probably care less about some of the minutiae that I used to obsess over. Realise that life isn't black and white, that it is 100% shades of grey, more than 50 of them.
Turn the camera off.
Turn the camera off. We've got to go.
We'll leave it on. Let's go.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly that generational sort of aspect. I mean, you guys, you've got, kids of your own. You know this all too well. It's people say it's just impossible to describe to another parent. Other people are like, I'm thinking about having kids, and you're like, don't do it. Actually, no, I can't really tell you that because you're going to miss out on so much if you don't. So you just kind of need to shut up. Now I understand why no one really offered me any useful advice before, because you just can't. It has certainly, and I think every parent can attest to this, made me realize how much time I wasted. Now life for me
there just isn't enough time in the day, right?
There's not enough time in the day. You get really good at scheduling, but now it's no longer about, oh man, we could make this money here, we could make this money there, we got to go and exploit this opportunity. So now none of that even enters my sphere of understanding at all now. It's like, how do I want to spend my time? What is like I don't need the fancy house. We live in like a crack den of a farmhouse to make ends meet. Like we still 12 years on, so it's not certain things that were important to me before are absolutely so low on the radar as to not even register. And I think that's a good thing,
Mate, this wine, I mean, Nero d'Avola, similar narrative in many respects to Fiano in terms of its suitability to Australia. I'd like to wrap it up shortly. I'm not going into too much depth with this, except to say that this is just a juicy, midweight, delicious red wine that should be on every dinner table in the country. This is the kind of red that just makes so much sense here. I'm to what you said before about Shiraz, these big Shiraz, I just can't drink the stuff anymore. And it just makes me feel like shit. I'm getting older, maybe, and I just don't pull up as well.
There's great Syrah out there. There are great Syrah producers.
Amazing Syrah. I love tasting them. I love exploring them. The way they can speak to vineyards and regionality in Syrah is incredible. From cool climate, warm climate, it grows everywhere. But in terms of what I actually want to drink a bottle of, and what goes with the food that I'll drink at home when I'm out, it's just very rare.
It's Nero and Grenache for me. They're the two.
Nero, Grenache, or lighter red Pinot Gamay as well. I really enjoy, although French, I know. So, but this wine I think is such a great prototype for what we should all be aiming to produce. Is these midweight, juicy.
It's interesting,
reds that taste. They've got some sunshine in them as well, which is part of Australia.
It's part of us. Like we've got a really high UV index, and the sun is probably one of the most like underexplored and under sort of spoken about things about Australian terroir. And if you talk to guys like Pat Sullivan or Mac Forbes, they're really sort of particular, or Bill Downey, really particular on things like sunlight. Nero d'Avola, the other, talking about like a prototype. The Nero from Australia is really different to the Nero from Italy, and I'm very proud about that. And there's a common thread and trend that it's sort of collective consciousness. Like all of the winemakers have started making these Neros that are like a really similar style, but none of us actually talk or work together. So it's just kind of happened. But it is red wines, just in general, Nero predominantly with no or low tannin. Like a lot of the Neros that are being produced, like Nero for the most part in Italy is quite extracted and it's quite alcoholic and it's quite rich and it's quite dense and it's quite tannic, and it can be the way that they work it, whereas in Australia we've kind of strayed away from it, not because we're like we need to make our own style, we've just made it this way. And I kind of liken it to as the foil or the parry, right, to Grenache, because it's like low tannin, high acid, low tannin, no acid. So Australians have these two very primary fruited options. One that can deliver acid and one that can deliver no acid. That is both. We talk about how like chilled reds is having a moment. I don't think so. I actually don't think that people are actually chilling their reds in the Australian context for the most part. But I think chillable reds, as in reds that have the ability to be chilled and taste yummy, which is effectively reds with no tannin. And I think it's a real sort of check and balance, or just a pendulum swing away from, we're getting a lot of tannin in our foods now, being more vegetable-based diets. Being more Asiatic-based diets, soy has large amounts of tannin, fish has large amount of tannin, and the way it gets cooked, charred things is becoming a lot more part of the Australian diet. So I don't think we need structure anymore from our wines, more so than we need, say, refreshing acidity or lack of acidity, depending on the dish. So I think Nero, as a prototype of style as well as the grape variety, certainly has a very vibrant future in the country.
Mate, the wines have never looked better. I actually don't taste some of these wines as much as I should, just because we're flat out and I know them so well now. But to revisit the range, there's a real pinpoint clarity to the wines and balance in these three, which is beautiful. So hats off to Laura and the team.
And the team. Yeah, Caroline, our winemaker, she's big hats off to her. She's an absolute weapon. Full female winemaking team, cellar hands and all. Amazing. We have one lone dude in production. In fact, we're the opposite of what everyone talks about in the wine industry. Production is like 90% female, and marketing and sales is majority male. So I don't know how that works, but go figure.
Oh, just yourself and Laura, I guess, just playing out there.
Playing to our strengths.
With that, almost more importantly than the wines in many respects, just congratulations and thank you on what you guys have built and what you do, because I genuinely believe it's a significantly important part of the modern Australian wine puzzle. I know that from talking to our customers as well, that you've been a gateway into a lot of these new wines, that there's no doubt that in a generation or two from now, the industry's going to see a lot more of this. And I think you guys, and plenty of others as well, you mentioned the Chalmers family, of course, but what you've been able to do, taking that sustainability framework, variety framework, but then finding a new way to package it up and deliver it to consumers through price points, packaging, the communication, the content, the YouTube, all that stuff. It's really inspiring, mate. So well done. We love it. We've learned a lot from watching your journey and keen to support. So that's about all I have to say about that.
That's all about to have to say about that.
That's all I have to say. All right, mate. Go on, friend.
Cheers, mate. Cheers, brother.
All right. Good. Cheers, guys. Woo! I thought I was going to cry.